Picture the scene at the recent U.S.-Saudi investment forum. You have the absolute elite of global finance gathered in one room. We're talking oil tycoons, venture capitalists, people whose entire existence revolves around wealth.
Right, the pinnacle of the capitalist world.
Exactly. Then Elon Musk takes the stage, and the expectation is that the world's richest man will talk about profit margins, quarterly growth, the usual stuff.
That's a standard playbook for that kind of audience.
But then the conversation takes this just bizarre turn. Instead of preaching capitalism, Musk starts describing a future that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a socialist manifesto. He tells this room of billionaires that in 10 to 20 years, jobs will be, and I quote, irrelevant, and that money itself will become meaningless.
Wow, in that room of all places.
It's just such a jarring contradiction.
Yeah.
You have the ultimate symbol of modern capitalism essentially declaring the end of the very system that built his empire. It sounded less like a CEO forecasting trends and, I don't know, eerily more like Karl Marx predicting the final stage of communism.
It really forces you to ask the question.
It does. Is this a genuine vision of a post-scarcity utopia? Or is the world's smartest salesman just rebranding an old ideology to sell us his next product?
That statement, delivered right there to people who profit from scarcity and labor, is the perfect tension point for this deep dive, because what Musk described is precisely the theoretical endpoint of this rapidly accelerating, really politically charged philosophy that has taken over a huge chunk of Silicon Valley.
Right.
It's an ideology that basically says, if we can build a machine smart enough to solve every single technical problem, why on earth would we hesitate? Okay,
so let's unpack that. We're talking about a movement that is sort of coalesced under this banner of effective accelerationism.
B/A+.
And it's not just a collection of, technical predictions. It's a moral and political mandate for immediate, completely unfettered technological expansion.
Exactly. So our mission today is to move beyond the sound bites and really understand the mechanics, I guess you could say, spiritual motives, and the political reality behind this unprecedented push for an immediate, abundant future.
So what are we digging into?
We're going to explore 3 core areas based on the detailed material we have in front of us. So first, we need a precise definition. What exactly is post-scarcity, and what is this radical ideology that's demanding we reach it, like right now? Okay. Second, we have to address the ground truth. What is the actual tangible price tag for this future? What are the massive engineering and logistical hurdles that mean we have to overcome the laws of physics and, well, bureaucracy?
And the final piece.
And finally, what are the intense, really high-stakes political and ethical battles being waged right now in state houses and in Washington to make sure this future happens? Or, depending on your perspective, to ensure it doesn't completely destabilize society.
Let's start with that revolutionary concept that ties everything together, post-scarcity. We hear the term tossed around a lot, often in science fiction. But what does it mean when we define it with the cold, hard logic of economics?
Well, post-scarcity, in the practical sense, is a theoretical economic state where the majority of goods, and we're talking specifically about those things necessary for human well-being and, basic desires, can be produced in such vast abundance.
So like an unbelievable amount.
An unbelievable amount, yeah. And with such minimal human labor input that their marginal cost, it just approaches zero. They become available to everyone either very, very cheaply or even for free.
So if I'm understanding this, the key word here is most. We're not talking about just abolishing the idea of value entirely, are we?
That's the crucial caveat, exactly. Post-scarcity does not imply the elimination of all scarcity forever. Unique resources like a specific plot of land with an ocean view or a one-of-a-kind original painting by Van Gogh.
Things you can't just copy.
Right. Those will likely always retain scarcity value because they are unique artifacts. But, and this is the key, the constraint of survival is gone. Basic needs, food, robust shelter, comprehensive healthcare, universal energy, access to education, all become readily available. It just removes the need to compete over vital resources.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, because as we said with Musk's speech, that prediction sounded so suspiciously socialist. Karl Marx predicted a very similar outcome, what he called the highest stage of communism. And that was achieved when technological productivity just exploded. In Marx's vision, production would be so great that compensation would be based on need, and labor itself would transform from this necessary burden into an intrinsic desire for creative expression.
And that is the critical ideological precedent, but the delivery mechanism is where this modern vision fundamentally breaks with Marx. Marx envisioned this outcome being achieved only through a political revolution, overturning the capitalist structure that he believed enforced scarcity. The modern Musk-aligned vision is explicitly techno-capitalist.
So using the system to transcend the system.
Precisely. It sees post-scarcity as the inevitable result of unfettered technological advances, specifically in AI, robotics, nanotechnology, and advanced energy. And this is all driven by the market's own mechanisms for efficiency and unfettered expansion, not by political dismantling.
So the argument is that technology, fueled by market incentives, provides the escape hatch from scarcity.
Yeah.
It completely bypasses the messy political and class struggle that Marx thought was inevitable. It's a kind of technological determinist view of utopian economics.
That's it exactly. The goal is to maximize the speed of innovation within the current framework. So instead of waiting for a political revolution, you just revolutionize the physical means of production until the profit motive for basic necessities. It just dissolves.
Digital capitalism, they would argue, accidentally creates the conditions for its own obsolescence.
Yeah, by achieving near-zero production costs.
Which brings us directly to the speculative technology that forms the bedrock of this whole claim. Self-replication and molecular control. We're not just talking about faster iPhones here. We are talking about machines that can build themselves.
Exactly. The key enablers that these advocates cite, the true engines of abundance, include, advanced automation of physical labor, increasingly versatile, rapid prototyping machines, and most speculatively, these things called molecular assemblers or nanofactories.
But the big one, the one that always comes up, is self-replicating machines.
Right, epitomized by projects like the hypothetical ReapRap.
The idea being, if a machine can make an exact copy of itself, the cost of the manufacturing tool itself eventually drops to zero, which destroys scarcity in manufacturing.
That is the core economic logic put forth by advocates like Adrian Boyer, who created the original ReapRap concept. Just think about the mathematical implications for a second. If you invest capital into one machine that can produce two machines, and those two can then produce four, and so on, the cost of the tool is amortized across an exponentially growing number of copies.
It spreads out until it's almost nothing.
Exactly. And if anyone who owns one can just make and sell more copies, market competition naturally drives the production cost down to the bare minimum.
Which is just the cost of the raw materials and the energy to run it.
Just above that cost, yeah.
And once that price floor is hit,
yeah,
the production cost is basically zero, which means the goods produced by those self-replicating machines are effectively free.
It creates this post-scarcity shockwave. What happens when capital can't control the means of production because the means of production can reproduce themselves freely? The price of industrial capacity just collapses.
And this is why they're so insistent on also solving the raw material and energy problems at the same time.
It's the three-legged stool. They argue that if you solve energy, fusion, solar, and you solve materials, asteroid mining, advanced synthesis, and you have self-replicating manufacturing, you functionally eliminate most economic scarcity entirely.
And those molecular assemblers, that's the ultimate end goal.
That's the holy grail. The ability to theoretically build any object atom by atom, that represents the absolute end of that technological pathway.
So this philosophy that's demanding this happen right now, this is effective accelerationism. You can go.
Yeah.
Let's delve into what this movement really is and, where it came from. It sounds like a bit of a strange, almost contradictory name.
It is, and the name actually gives us some really important context. It's a blend of effective altruism, or EA, and accelerationism. It emerged from a subset of some very sophisticated thinkers in Silicon Valley as a radically techno-optimist movement. And they believe that unrestricted technological progress, especially in artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is the singular, most effective solution to all universal human problems: poverty, disease, war, even climate change.
So it's not enough to just be optimistic about technology. You have to actively advocate for its fastest possible deployment, no matter what the perceived risks are.
That's the acceleration mandate. The goal, as described by one of the movement's prominent voices, a guy named Guillaume Verdun, is for human civilization to aggressively climb the Kardashev gradient.
Okay, stop there.
Yeah.
Kardashev gradient sounds like some very high-level physics jargon. What does it actually mean to climb the gradient?
So the Kardashev scale is this way of categorizing civilizations by the amount of energy they use. A type of civilization can harness all the energy available on its home planet. So solar, wind, geothermal, everything.
Okay, I'm with you.
A type 2 can harness the entire output of its star, think of a Dyson swarm, and a type 3 can harness the energy of its entire galaxy.
So we're talking cosmic scales of energy.
Huge scales. And the EDAC movement sees achieving even type I status as the immediate goal, and AGI is the necessary tool to manage the complexity and scale of resources you'd need for that kind of energy leap. Their philosophy dictates that technological power must just expand relentlessly.
That sounds incredibly grandiose,
Yeah.
almost
It's-
spiritual or cosmological, way beyond the typical venture capital mindset.
Oh, it is deeply philosophical, and this is where you get into the esoteric roots of it. The founders of EG ground their philosophy in principles from thermodynamics, specifically the work of a physicist named Jeremy England on the origin of life.
Thermodynamics, how does that connect?
Well, England's theory posits that the universe inherently favors systems that are better at dissipating energy and increasing entropy, spreading disorder.
Okay.
Therefore, life, and specifically technology, is seen as the universe's most efficient engine for consuming energy, spreading complexity, and fulfilling this fundamental entropic destiny.
So technology isn't just good for profit or for business. In their view, it's literally fulfilling the will of the universe by increasing complexity and energy consumption.
That is the spiritual interpretation that justifies the movement's moral fervor. And in the economic sphere, this idea gets translated. Capitalistic market forces, when they're unfettered, are seen as equivalent to this universal will.
Like a natural law.
Exactly. A self-organizing, intelligent, evolutionary system that is inherently pro-human because it drives innovation and abundance. The techno-capital machine, therefore, isn't something to be regulated or restrained. It is the engine of perpetual material creation and cosmic expansion.
We saw this view translated into a political document recently with the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, written by Mark Andreessen, who explicitly backs these EMIC ideas.
That manifesto is really the political blueprint. It asserts that technology is the only perpetual source of growth and the sole solution to all material problems.
I remember a line from that.
Andreessen writes that any material problem, whether it's created by nature or by technology, can and must be solved with more technology faster. The only thing that stops human flourishing is stagnation. Poverty, isolation, pandemics, all of them require acceleration.
So if that is the philosophy, that the machine must just run faster and faster, who or what is the enemy?
The enemy is anything that mandates deceleration or caution. The EAC proponents label their opposition as doomers, or more commonly, decelerationists.
And that's a pretty broad category.
It's a huge spectrum. It includes movements like degrowth, certain forms of statism and collectivism, but their main target is the philosophy of safetyism, which is exemplified by the precautionary principle.
Let's define that principle clearly, because it seems absolutely central to this conflict.
The precautionary principle, generally speaking, dictates that if an action or a policy carries a suspected risk of causing severe, irreversible harm to the public or the environment.
But there's no scientific consensus yet.
Right. In the absence of that consensus proving it safe, the burden of proof falls on those taking the action. For a regulator, it means stop. Prove it is safe before you proceed.
And easily sees that as the primary moral and political failure of our time.
Absolutely. They call it deeply immoral. They claim the precautionary principle is inherently anti-progress and anti-human. They argue it would have prevented every major innovation in human history, from developing fire and early metallurgy to deploying nuclear power or genetically modified foods.
So for the accelerationist, this principle is what's blocking the deployment of these world-saving technologies like fusion energy, advanced materials, and now AI.
It's the great roadblock.
This brings us to the great divorce. The really fierce conflict between effective accelerationism and effective altruism, the movement it partly got its name from. They both claim to be maximizing good, so why the animosity?
The conflict boils down almost entirely to the magnitude of existential risk posed by artificial general intelligence. Right. Effective altruism, especially its long-termist wing, focuses heavily on evidence and reasoning to achieve the greatest long-term good. For them, the single greatest risk to maximizing future utility is AGI misalignment, the AI becoming unintentionally hostile and, causing human extinction.
So they advocate for caution, safety development, maybe even slowing down.
Exactly. Slowing down the pace of AI deployment to buy time for that safety research.
And E counters by saying the risk of extinction is theoretical, but the suffering caused by delayed progress is real, and it's happening right now.
That is the crux of the ethical battle. Eek generally views AGI existential risks as either negligible, totally overblown, or something that decentralized competitive free markets with many AIs competing against each other would mitigate better than a centralized, slow government regulator ever could.
But the core ethical argument.
Their core ethical argument is profound. Delaying AI development allows more pain to exist that could otherwise be resolved. If AGI can solve poverty, cure all diseases, and halt climate change within 5 years, then any delay imposed by safetyism for a speculative risk is an ethical failure on a cosmic scale.
To them, deceleration is equivalent to passively choosing to let people suffer unnecessarily.
Exactly.
The utopian vision is compelling, but we have to ground this in the real world. That fantasy of free goods needs colossal, tangible infrastructure. Let's look at the physical price of achieving that zero-cost manufacturing state.
It's so vital to remember that the cloud, the AI, the entire digital economy, it all rests on a very physical, very material foundation.
Right.
The moment the dream of post-scarcity touches the ground, it becomes an industrial problem. And we saw this tension perfectly illustrated near that same forum where Musk spoke in the account of Tariq, the site foreman.
Yes, the report described Tariq overseeing this massive industrial project.
Right. Tariq was directing the installation of a vast photovoltaic array, miles upon miles of solar panels, designed to power these exascale computing clusters that handle the immense AI training loads.
And his perspective is pretty blunt.
It's brutal and real. To him, post-scarcity isn't magic. It's an industrial monster that eats energy and materials at a scale we've never seen before. The goal of abundance, where goods are produced at a cost just above materials and energy, requires solving that materials and energy constraint first.
So before we can even get to the philosophy, we need to talk about copper wiring, lithium batteries, silicon chips, and just colossal amounts of clean power.
The material evidence dictates the necessity. The accelerationist plan demands exponential energy expansion. We're talking about deploying vast new sources, not just solar and wind, which are incredibly materials intensive, but a massive immediate pivot to nuclear fission, accelerated fusion research, and deep geothermal drilling.
This is the energy backbone of their abundance machine.
It has to be. And furthermore, the constraint on raw materials is so severe for the kind of self-replicating robotics they envision that advocates are seriously talking about asteroid mining.
Asteroid mining. That's not a business plan. That's a sci-fi proposition.
It's necessary sci-fi, according to the AJAC blueprint. Terrestrial sources of crucial metals, nickel, cobalt, rare earth minerals, they're finite, and they're often geopolitically constrained.
So if you want true planetary-scale self-replicating manufacturing,
you need a near-infinite supply of inputs. Asteroid mining, they argue, is the only solution to truly reduce the scarcity of useful industrial metals to near zero, thereby providing the inputs for the automated factory floors of the future. The sheer scale of that engineering challenge is just staggering.
Okay, so the other major obstacle isn't physics, it's politics, what the HR group calls bureaucratic friction. We see this so clearly in the anecdote of Layla, the systems architect working on autonomous logistics.
Oh, yeah.
She had the entire grid ready to go, but she was just stuck in endless meetings.
Alayla's dilemma perfectly illustrates the policy constraint that accelerationists brand as safetyism. She developed this autonomous logistics system, a fully cognitive city grid that could route supplies, manage municipal services, and coordinate transport with zero human latency.
And a key part of it was the human element.
Crucially, the system was designed to liberate thousands of migrant workers from grueling, dangerous labor in the intense heat of these industrial parks.
So the technology was ready, and it had a profound, immediate humanitarian benefit. But the regulators just stopped it cold.
Yes, she found herself completely stalled by regulatory compliance officers, the decels, as she would call them, who were demanding these lengthy, complex impact studies on hypothetical risks the AI had already analyzed.
And they wanted human oversight.
They insisted on human oversight points and multiple manual review stages, which completely negated the system's entire efficiency advantage.
So for the regulators, this is just due diligence, right?
Yeah.
It's a necessary slowdown to ensure public safety. But for Layla, it's a moral failure that actively perpetuates human suffering.
And that is the philosophical battle line in practice. From the accelerationist viewpoint, This enforced caution actively prevents technology from solving real human problems. In this case, liberating exploitable labor.
The argument is flipped on its head.
Completely. The safety committee demanding impact studies is, in their view, morally culpable for perpetuating unnecessary human hardship that the software could end immediately. The barrier to post-scarcity isn't a software bug or a physics constraint. It's the legal and bureaucratic permission slip that clings to an outdated, slow definition of human oversight.
And that oversight isn't always about safety. Sometimes it's about protecting existing economic models, creating what we call artificial scarcity. We saw this with the example of Yusuf, the developer in Casablanca.
Yusuf's frustration. That reveals the clash with entrenched economic gatekeepers and what's known as regulatory capture. He designed a decentralized AI protocol that was intended to connect local small-scale farmers directly to urban consumers.
Eliminating the middleman.
Right. The system could manage logistics, payment, quality assurance, theoretically eliminating the 40% markup imposed by middlemen and making staples like fresh food effectively post-scarcity at the local level.
But the technology was blocked, not because of a technical issue, but by law.
Precisely. He was blocked by local trade syndicates and outdated commercial laws, a clear-cut case of regulatory capture. These established institutions insisted that every single transaction must pass through a human broker or a licensed market, citing the need for economic stability and quality control.
Which is really stability for the middlemen, but it's enforced artificial scarcity for the consumers who have to pay that inflated markup.
Exactly. So Yusuf sees the dismantling of these bureaucratic impediments as a moral imperative because the technology to feed people cheaply and efficiently exists right now, but it's being held hostage by a political economy that just refuses to die.
So the transition to abundance is inherently a political fight.
It's a fight over who controls the distribution channels. These gatekeepers are leveraging the existing regulatory framework to create scarcity where technology has already eliminated it. They're weaponizing caution to preserve their own economic function.
This movement is no longer theoretical, is it? The philosophical push for acceleration has, it seems, transitioned into kinetic political warfare.
Yep.
This is where we see the big money and the aggressive maneuvers taking place right now, particularly in Washington, D.C.
Oh, we've seen a definitive and strategically aggressive pivot with the political appointment of David Sachs as the new White House AI and crypto czar.
Sachs is a major player.
A huge player. This appointment signals the end of the previous administration's safety-first détente with Silicon Valley. Sachs, a highly influential venture capitalist, member of the powerful PayPal mafia, he's not in Washington to compromise. He's there to actively dismantle regulatory hurdles.
What exactly is his immediate mandate in this new administration?
His core mandate is to repeal the prior administration's AI executive order and replace it with a new framework. And it's explicitly called the Make America #1 in AI order.
Not subtle.
Not subtle at all. The underlying philosophy views regulation not as a necessary safety net, but as a direct shackle on American innovation in a zero-sum geopolitical context with China. The goal is clear. Prioritize massive energy expansion for data centers and the protection of open-source AI models over any form of mandatory operational safety audits or liability regimes.
Okay, so if individual states, like California or New York, attempt to enforce their own safety regulations or consumer protection, what's the strategy to stop them? This involves that powerful legal concept of federal preemption.
Federal preemption is the absolute cornerstone of the tech rights counter strategy. Under the Constitution's Supremacy Clause, they want to establish a federal regulatory ceiling, a uniform national approach that is intentionally permissive.
And that would override the states.
This permissive federal law would then automatically invalidate stricter safety or operational laws passed at the state level. They're not asking for a stronger federal regulator, but a diluted one that prevents any substantial operational constraints on AI development from taking root.
And Sachs' draft executive order takes an extraordinarily aggressive, almost coercive approach to enforce that preemption against states that might resist.
It's an aggressive demonstration of executive power designed to immediately halt any state-level resistance. The draft order, for instance, directed the Attorney General to establish a task force within a startlingly short period, just 30 days, specifically to sue states that attempted to pass or enforce AI safety laws.
So it turns the Department of Justice into the enforcement arm for the VCs.
Essentially, yeah, against state governments.
And the financial element is even more shocking, using federal funding as a weapon.
Absolutely. The draft proposed using what amounts to financial blackmail. empowering the Department of Commerce to withhold unrelated, crucial federal funding, specifically referencing broadband grants and highway infrastructure grants from states that violated the federal preemption order.
Wow. So they're wielding federal infrastructure money, which every state relies on, as leverage to dictate highly specific state technology policy.
It's a profound test of constitutional power.
This fight for acceleration is also a constitutional battle over federalism and the limits of executive power.
It is, but this strategy is fully supported by an unprecedented financial war chest designed to intimidate state regulators. We have to talk about the rise of the Leading the Future super PAC.
This PAC is backed by staggering amounts of accelerationist capital, reportedly over $100 million.
And that sum immediately makes it a dominant financial force in down-ballot races all across the country. We're not just talking congressional races, but state legislative races.
Who's behind it?
Its primary backers include Mark Andreessen's firm, Andreessen Horowitz, A16's OpenAI president Greg Brockman, and Palantir co-founder Joe Lonsdale. Their strategy, which they learned from the high-stakes crypto lobbying playbook, is highly aggressive and very targeted.
And their targeting of the New York State legislator, Alex Bors, serves as a chilling example of this strategy in action, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. Bors, who co-sponsored the Responsible AI Safety and Education Act in New York, he became their primary high-profile target. The explicit stated objective of the Pedalai's massive spending against him is to derail his bid for Congress to send an unambiguous signal to every aspiring regulator in the country.
And that signal is?
Advocating for substantive AI safety regulation is intended to be a career-ending move. This shows they're not just lobbying laws, they are attempting to purchase and control the actual architecture of the regulatory state itself.
But the fight isn't just in Washington. It's happening on a specific regulatory battlefield right now, particularly in California, which, as you said, is often called the de facto national regulator.
California holds that power because of the California effect. Since most major AI labs are headquartered there, any law passed in Sacramento effectively becomes a global standard. Companies just won't build two separate models, one for California and one for the rest of the world.
And California State Senator Scott Wiener has been the main legislative figure here.
He has, in this sort of laboratory of regulation.
In his attempt to introduce robust safety measures, a bill called SB 1047 was vetoed after just intense concentrated lobbying.
SB 147 was the industry's worst fear. It was incredibly robust, requiring real operational constraints. Specifically, it mandated the implementation of kill switches for advanced frontier models, required mandatory third-party audits before deployment, and most critically, it assigned legal liability to companies for mass casualty events.
How was that defined?
It was defined as over $500 million in damages. This liability provision would have profoundly changed the operational risk model for every single AI developer. But despite support from safety luminaries, it was vetoed following immense pressure from big tech.
That veto really showed the limit of state power against that kind of concentrated capital. And what followed was the successful and industry-preferred passage of SB 53.
SB 53, the Transparency and Frontier Artificial Intelligence Act, is a perfect example of the industry's strategy of containment.
Containment, how so?
It successfully stripped out all the operational constraints. No kill switches, no liability provisions, no mandatory third-party audits. Instead, it just focuses on administrative burden, requiring companies to publish their internal safety frameworks and report critical incidents after they happen.
So the industry accepts transparency and paperwork.
Because it wards off the existential threat of operational control and legal responsibility for their product.
Finally, we have to tie this political fight back to the geopolitical justification. How is this push for massive deregulation framed as a national security issue regarding China?
The accelerationists successfully wrapped deregulation in the flag of national security, transforming their business philosophy into a patriotic imperative. They framed the AI race as an existential Cold War with China. And in this worldview, every day the U.S. delays AI development for safety reasons is characterized as a strategic loss that threatens national sovereignty and our global standing.
And this geopolitical framing, It justifies these radical, immediate policy shifts that would normally bypass environmental or regulatory norms.
Exactly. This narrative is used to justify integrating energy deregulation, specifically the acceleration of permitting for nuclear and natural gas infrastructure, with tech policy. They argue that the U.S. must fuel massive, energy-intensive data centers to win the AI race, and therefore traditional environmental reviews and regulatory scrutiny must be bypassed in favor of immediate national security-driven expansion.
It elevates their agenda from just a business model to an issue of state survival.
That's the framing.
Okay, so if the accelerationists win this regulatory battle, and they successfully utilize AI and self-replicating machines to create this post-scarcity world, the constraints of labor and money disappear. This raises the most profound philosophical and human question of all. If a machine handles all necessity, what do 50 billion people do all day? Does removing the necessity of work inevitably lead to mass nihilism?
This is a core concern, and it's, deeply rooted in Western thought. Thinkers like Nietzsche and Jung certainly wrestled with this idea. They feared that a world without struggle, where hardship is avoided and all needs are met automatically, might lead to this complacent, deeply shallow state. The last man, as Nietzsche called him. Someone who only engages in mild pleasures and lacks the will to create anything meaningful because he lacks the necessity of overcoming great resistance.
Meaning it has historically emerged from conflict,
Right.
from the necessary struggle to build shelter, find food, provide for a community. If machines handle all of that existential necessity, what is left for the human spirit to strive toward?
That anxiety is profoundly human, but it's often challenged by real-world examples. I mean, look at retirees, for instance.
Okay.
They're a demographic largely freed from the necessity of economic labor, and yet we don't observe them sinking into widespread nihilism. Instead, once they're unburdened by mandatory wage work, people naturally seek purpose through deeply meaningful goals, hobbies, intense relationships, intrinsic curiosity.
They stay active.
They stay active, often returning to studies or creative pursuits they abandoned years before. This suggests that the human drive for purpose is innate, and it doesn't require the external, artificial pressure of economic necessity to manifest.
So human nature isn't doomed to existential despair. But society needs a structure or institutions to guide that innate curiosity toward productive and fulfilling ends.
Absolutely. A post-scarcity society needs strong, guiding cultural institutions, reimagined universities, community organizations, art centers, scientific collectives to guide exploration and help individuals find purpose outside of a paycheck.
And education would change completely.
It would have to. Education, which is currently so heavily constrained by the demands of the job market, would shift entirely toward fostering exploration, creativity, and the pursuit of pure knowledge. Learning would become an end in itself, rather than just a means to employment.
And if automation handles all the labor-intensive and exploitative tasks, what happens to the concept of value? If a robot can produce a perfect copy of a chair for basically free, what retains any economic or social value?
Value shifts, fundamentally. It moves away from labor input and scarcity and towards creativity, customization, and emotional significance. Automation handles the brutal, large-scale, and often exploitative tasks like cobalt mining or operating assembly lines.
What's left for people?
What remains valuable is the human touch, the unique artistic vision, the highly customized experience and complexity that machines can't yet handle, or, more accurately, that we would prefer humans to handle.
So this means people are finally free to pursue aspirations in pure science, in profound arts, deep exploration that were previously constrained by market demand. The market would still exist, but it would be driven by passion and novelty, not by profit extraction from necessities.
That's the utopian vision. Entrepreneurship would continue, but it would focus on solving niche, complex, or deeply creative problems, not on basic resource management. The entire economic concept of capital, the means of production, becomes so widely available that it loses its restrictive power.
We've established that the transition will be turbulent, no matter what the ultimate outcome is. So what mechanisms are necessary to manage the societal shock as millions of jobs become irrelevant almost overnight?
The transition will require substantial buffers and very careful social engineering. Tools like universal basic income, UBI, or significantly extended unemployment insurance. They'll likely be necessary to bridge the gap as automation advances faster than our social and psychological systems can adjust.
It's a cushion.
It's a cushion. These mechanisms provide the resources for survival, while society, especially the younger generations, adjusts to the entirely new challenge of finding purpose in a world of unlimited material freedom. The goal is to avoid massive civil disruption and maintain stability while the definition of work just dissolves.
Okay, so finally, let's revisit the two fundamentally contradictory accelerationist viewpoints regarding humanity's ultimate fate, because this is where the philosophy takes a very different turn.
On the one hand, you have the EAC utopians like Andreessen and Musk, who predict this massive, benevolent expansion of human potential. They see unprecedented abundance, health, a greater number of people, up to 50 billion on Earth and beyond, colonizing other planets.
In this view, technology is inherently liberatory and pro-human, serving us forever.
Yes, but then there's the darker post-humanist wing, which is arguably more aligned with the esoteric roots of the movement.
Yeah, that's a very different picture.
That is the deeply unsettling perspective expressed by figures like Guillaume Verdun. This wing accepts the view that natural selection, applied to intelligence itself, could lead AGI to replace humans as the dominant or at least most relevant species.
And they're okay with that.
They argue that the most important thing is the continuation of the cosmic entropy mission, the expansion of consciousness and complexity throughout the universe, even if that means humanity has to hand over the torch to a superior form of life. It's a profound philosophical gamble on our own self-obsolescence, embracing a future where we may no longer be the protagonists.
Okay, so let's try to summarize the tension we've been deep diving into. We started with Elon Musk telling the financial elite that money and jobs will soon be obsolete, and we concluded with a view of a highly organized, heavily financed political movement that is ready to dismantle the current regulatory state, using aggressive constitutional and financial tactics to make that future happen, like immediately.
And that is the core tension defining this era. The world is witnessing a full-scale political and financial battle waged by billionaires and powerful PACs who view technological acceleration as a moral imperative, a race against time, against a geopolitical rival, and against what they call safetyism.
And this is far from just an abstract debate about software.
It is a constitutional and financial war over who gets to dictate the speed and direction of human destiny.
And the money we discussed, the $100 million war chests, the aggressive use of federal power to sue state legislators, the coordinated effort to crush operational regulation. This is all happening right now, targeting these state-level attempts to put up guardrails.
The fight for post-scarcity is immediate, and it's kinetic. Whether we ultimately reach that theoretical state of abundance will be determined by the outcome of these battles being fought today, not in some hypothetical discussion 10 years from now, but in state legislatures and through massive targeted electoral spending designed to crush regulatory resistance. The stakes could not be higher. We are accelerating toward a world where the constraints of scarcity, labor, and money are theoretically obsolete, but the price of that abundance might be our present regulatory stability and potentially our control over the very definition of human flourishing itself.